In this village in Siaya County, it's celebration time. The residents are welcoming guests to their big day. Today, they will get the ultimate recognition, a certificate to prove that in this village, everyone uses a latrine and that defecating in the open is now part of a sad history they would rather forget. Wow. Yet that journey has been a long and challenging one. In Kenya, nearly 80% of the population lives in rural areas. Here, life appears basic. The people dwell at close proximity with their environment from which they get their food, material for shelter, fuel and water. But in that same environment is a silent killer that robs each village of valuable sons and daughters every year: poor sanitation. Throughout the world, an estimated 1 billion people lack access to safe drinking water, and another 2.6 billion live without adequate toilet facilities. And so each of such poor villages is turned into one big open toilet.
The science tells us that most of the diseases that in Africa and indeed in Kenya that we are bogged with every day actually are diseases that actually have their own originality or connection to poor environment that is not being controlled.
And beginning from even a city like Nairobi, if people are defecating in the open, what about, the other areas where there is plenty of bushes and all that?
Many people don't understand the connection between improper disposal of waste and disease. One thinks that once he disposes his or her waste along the roadside, he believes or she believes that it will just remain there. But down the line, when it rains, it will just go down. If it doesn't rain, the flies will just pick it.
Once deposited in the environment, disease-carrying fecal matter finds its way into the water system and food and is ingested into the body. The result is waterborne diseases such as diarrhea, cholera and typhoid, wreaking havoc especially on women and children. Research reveals that half of the hospital beds in the developing world are occupied by people suffering from sanitation and water-related diseases. A very costly affair for an already burdened health system.
When I was talking to one of the young men in my previous encounter, they told me that they incur up to a total of about 6,000 shillings in medical bills. About 1,000 is for transport, the nearest health facility. 5,000 is for the hospital charges when one is admitted. This brings it to about 6,000 shillings.
A recent World Bank report indicated that the growing disease burden was costing the Kenyan economy a whopping 27 billion shillings annually. In recent years, various interventions were put in place to roll back the disease impact on socio-economic life. But many of the approaches prescribed high initial standards and offered subsidies as an incentive. The Participatory Hygiene and Sanitation Transformation Approach, dubbed PHAST for instance, was majorly supply-driven and heavily focused on subsidies. But in the end, it did little to break the cycle of fecal-oral contamination and the spread of disease because communities did not fully understand why they should stop open defecation.
We went into the issues of introducing the improved ventilated pit latrine. We actually had a structure that we thought was best. And up to some point in time, I think we were even advocating that it should be made of stone and the pipe, all those issues.
In many cases, some of these facilities that were constructed with predetermined or prescribed designs never really picked up. In some cases, people never really made use of these facilities.
Initially, we did a policy, but a policy is a broad statement, the document. We are actually almost finishing our strategy, and in our strategy, we have gone ahead to describe how we want to address issues of sanitation. Indeed, we are describing the processes that we actually want to sustain. We will want to minimize issues of subsidy, provision of structures to individuals, because that actually creates dependence.
The next real promise was to come from afar, in the form of a novel idea pioneered by an Indian development practitioner, Dr. Kamal Kar, in Bangladesh. The concept known as Community-Led Total Sanitation, or CLTS, is more community-driven and advocates zero subsidy. It focuses on behavioral change and investing in community mobilization instead of hardware. It shifts the focus from mere toilet construction for individual households to the creation of open defecation-free villages, or ODF.
Minds have to be transformed through a process such as community-led total sanitation. It's not about you giving me a toilet, but being convinced that actually, if I dispose my shit well, then I'm also preventing my family and my neighbors from catching a disease, kipindupindu, things like typhoid.
If you can analyze the term CLTS, which is community-led total sanitation, here there are different elements. One is it has to be owned and led by the community, which means that it has generated from the beneficiaries themselves. It is not imposed from outside. The second is it talks about total sanitation. Total means for all members in the community at all times.
It is the multi-stage approach that begins with training of individuals who will then go into the communities to begin the triggering process. The Ministry of Public Health and Sanitation, with the support of partners such as SNV and UNICEF, has now trained staff to spearhead its new roadmap. The process involves taking members of the community on a walk of shame to the open defecation areas in their villages. And here, the taboo subject is discussed in graphic terms.
The training is normally hands-on. You train them about what CLTS is, or community-led total sanitation, what are the main tools you use from mapping to transect walk and all that.
At the heart of the new approach is the need to show that as long as even a minority continues to defecate in the open, everyone is at risk of disease. This triggers the community's desire for change and pushes them into action, leading to greater ownership and sustainability. That ownership and sustainability has especially resulted in the rise of natural leaders, the foot soldiers of ODF communities.
Natural in the sense that they emerge from the community and they take up the initiative, the leadership in triggering other villages.
I've triggered so many villages beyond my sublocation or my location or out of my division level. Right now, I've triggered 16 villages, apart from 4 villages which are falling under my sublocation where I come from, which is Kuchugo Central.
Natural leaders are with the people. They speak from their own experience. They trigger the people from their own experience. And even after an initiative is done, they stay put, they stay with the communities. And so they continue to ensure that the results achieved are actually sustainable. In other countries, really, they are taking up this initiative. For instance, Bangladesh. In May 2007, they held a large conference for natural leaders alone. And one of the things they had to do is to recognize them. One of the things they had to do was to see how to enable them participate in CLTS a lot better. And I think we need to move that way as a country.
Since its launch, the new approach has been able to break down the walls of taboo, with at least 976 villages achieving open defecation-free status and positively impacting the lives of at least 1 million people in the rural areas.
In the last 3 years, we've not had a cholera outbreak, though we've been having floods on and off. But the diarrheal diseases, we have to admit, we've had a change. There's been a reduction.
Nimefunza watoto wangu, wanajua mambo ya choo, hawawezi kunia ovyo ovyo. Sasa hiyo ndio sababu siwezi kukaa bila choo. Hata choo yangu ikianguka, inanibidi nijenge choo ingine haraka sana.
Nyaka nyocha koro watiyo gi puonjruogo, nyaka waluok sende wakete rak. Choo bende wadhiye, watiyo gi ash. Pii water bende wan godo kacha, likutin, manyicho wakonyrego. Koro waseneno berne. Kata ne nyithinde wagi, nyathi ok nyal chiemo ka ok ologo.
But that journey of adoption of CLTS has not been without its challenges.
Traditionally in Western, an in-law cannot share a sanitation facility with a daughter-in-law, for example. So for a household that is poor and cannot be able to construct more than one facility, what happens is they either don't construct at all or they construct one for visitors.
This subject is taboo. People never sat down and discussed where they go to the loo every morning. But when they do sit down and actually look at it and discuss where it is what are the fields that they practice their thing, they realize a lot of the time, in fact, most people do their practice right next to the river where they draw their water. Or that's where the chicken go to feed. This is basically very hazardous content that comes back to us through the water and food.
But with more villages embracing the new approach, the challenge remains how to maintain the toilets for a relatively long period of time. It is now generally agreed that a return to subsidies is not an option. Instead, focus is shifting to private sanitation practitioners to step in and plug the supply gap. But the solutions will still have to build on the existing practices, local capacity, community preferences, and infrastructure.
The private investors need to understand the emerging demand based on community preferences and make capital investments. And in this case, access to finance in flexible terms becomes a very important asset for SMEs in particular to invest in retailing such sanitation products.
Our partnership has been very strong because both the government through the Ministry of Public Health and UNICEF and other partners, we are convinced that this CLTS is the way forward for making sure that there can be a movement on sanitation, related to sanitation among the communities who are most deprived of their very basic rights to access to sanitation.
Improved sanitation for all can be achieved if different actors such as the private sector, the financial institutions harmonize their efforts by playing their respective roles. And this is not easy to achieve. Yes, it requires a very good strategy and action, especially from government and development partners. The private sector needs to see incentive. We need to buy the risk involved in developing new sanitation products and create an enabling environment for more private actors to come on board. And a strategic capacity building support is therefore needed in bringing synergy between demand and supply of sanitation products and solutions.
In order to sustain the gains made so far, we will need the support and collaboration of all the partners in the sector.
It is one meaning of having so many people triggered, and it is another meaning in having that being sustained. We declare one village today ODF free, but down the line, we must also make sure that that village is going to continuously remain ODF.
And so the journey continues, that of ensuring that an open defecation-free society is a reality for every child, every family, every community, and the entire nation. ODF Rural Kenya, yes, we can.